The building that accommodated one of the most tragically unforgettable workplace accidents in American history sits on the corner of Green Street and Washington Place in the Greenwich Village of New York City. In the early 20th century, the Ash Building housed the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory on the 10-story building's top 3 floors. The factory was owned by Max Blank and Isaac Harris, who used subcontractors for the manufacture of women's clothing. The Triangle Factory employed approximately 700, the great majority of whom were female Italian or European Jewish immigrants aged 15 through 23.
Sometimes a girl has a new hat. It never is much to look at because it never costs more than 50 cents. That means that we have gone for weeks on 2-cent lunches, dry cake and nothing else.
All the aforementioned conditions led to a general strike of garment workers, known as the Uprising of 20,000, in November of 1909. While other factories agreed to various reforms, shorter hours, collective bargaining, and safety improvements, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory retained its 59-hour work week and refused to install safety improvements.
When you made that much money, 50 years ago, you couldn't afford to have a sense of social responsibility, either to the individual worker or to the community. You couldn't be concerned with their welfare and even with the cost of life itself. You had to drive hard all the time to pile up more money, more profits.
It was late in the afternoon on a beautiful spring Saturday, March 25th, 1911. 4:40 p.m. to be exact, nearly quitting time at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York's Greenwich Village, where 500 workers got ready to collect their pay and go home. Someone dropped a match or a cigarette, and within minutes, the factory became an inferno. Fire ladders, which reached only 6 floors, were useless. The fire escape collapsed under the weight of desperate workers trying to escape. One of the doors, it would be reported, was locked. Onlookers out for a weekend stroll in nearby Washington Square Park watched in horror as women leapt to their deaths from upper-story windows, some crashing through the firemen's nets, others hitting the sidewalk with a sickening thud.
An investigation into the fire ensued. On evidence of the locked door, Blank and Harris were indicted for first- and second-degree manslaughter, but were later acquitted on the claim that they were unaware of the locked door. The families of 23 victims filed civil suits against Blank and Harris, and in 1914, a judge ordered them to pay $75 in compensation to each of the families. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory disaster was a terrible object lesson in the need for reforms in fire prevention and for labor reform in general. It also illustrated the need for solidarity amongst labor organization groups working for reform.
So the Triangle Fire was an important but tragic moment in the history of the progressive era. Many Americans, I think, intellectually understood the need for progressive reform, more role for the government and kind of overseeing our safety and protections. But an event like this made it very real for people. When you see more than 150 people die in a tragic accident that could have been prevented through basic government oversight, it's going to lead to change. So immediately in the city of New York and the state of New York, you start to see laws passed requiring inspections for workplaces. Workplace safety laws are put into effect. New regulations in firefighting are put into effect. And as with many changes in American history, they start in cities like New York and radiate outward. By the end of the progressive era, you see a major wave of reforms taking place. So it was a galvanizing moment in the progressive era.
The New York State Legislature appointed investigative delegations to examine factories across the state, and 30 ordinances in New York City were enacted to implement fire prevention measures. Significant long-term labor reforms were harder to achieve, and progress continued to be slow. Only in 1913, investigations, recommendations, and resolutions resulted in effective labor legislation. 54-hour work weeks became the law.
Meanwhile, all across the nation, reforms were consolidated throughout different sectors of society. Educational reformers worked with the National Women's Trade Union League, or the WTUL, to teach immigrants English and inform them of social issues and trade union practices. Suffragists joined forces with unions in their efforts to gain equal rights for women. Women of the middle and upper classes held fundraisers to support these labor organizations.